English Skills 2, How to Teach Culture, class number 8. Our goals today is to understand the concept of culture and cultural differences, to identify stages of cultural awareness, and to collect guidelines to teach culture. How can we define culture? What is culture? Well, we can get different opinions what culture is. For example, the Webster's dictionary says that culture is the integrated pattern of human knowledge, belief, and behavior that depends upon the capacity for learning and transmitting knowledge to succeeding generations. Edward Taylor said that culture is that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, customs, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. Eugene Nida says that culture is all learned behavior which is socially acquired, that is, the material and non-material traits which are passed on from one generation to another. With that in mind, we need to divide culture into visible culture, which is the surface features like dress, food, holidays, art, body language, etc., and the invisible culture, which is the people's values, attitudes, fears, etc., that drive cultural behavior. Here are some examples of ESL culture shock. An ESL student upset by the fact that no one answers him when he says, "How is it going?" He sees no difference with, "How have you been?" Understanding the difference between "I want to make an appointment," "I'd like to make an appointment," "I would like to make an appointment, please," "May or could I have an appointment?" "Call me sometime," and "Call me on Tuesday." Understanding that when an instructor says your paper needs a little work, that he really means it needs a lot of work. Next, you're going to watch a short video about culture conflicts. Here you have several scenarios of culture shock, and I would like you to think about if you have ever been in this situation or if you have ever seen someone in this situation. An ESL student trying to borrow notes and being hurt at being refused by a student who believe in either the value of intellectual property, self-reliance, or the right of an individual to refuse a request with which he feels uncomfortable. An ESL student saying "what's up" or later to a university dean or president. Not saying thank you in a context where a receptionist who spends a lot of time helping someone with or no results. Actually, repeated thanks are expected in the US. Copying from a published source with or no referencing or learning that long sentences don't mean intelligence. Not understanding that a high degree of familiarity with reading material is expected when academic reading is assigned for discussion. When we interact with people from other cultures, we need to understand that there are certain rules that are assumed to be universal, but they are not. These are called tacit rules for conversation. For example, in Asia, what do you think? Is it okay to ask how much do you weigh or how much money do you make? Okay or not okay? Well, it is okay in Asia. In the Arab world, is it okay to ask how is your wife or how is your daughter? This is something we generally ask here in the States, but there is not okay. In Europe, asking how much money do you make or how much do you weigh is not appropriate. Another problem is if you ask a Muslim student, "Why don't you drink?" or "Have you ever kissed your boyfriend or girlfriend?" They would be offended. Body language and physical contact can be offensive too. For example, Latin American Arab students may sit or stand too closely to others during conferences in the US. Vietnamese students may feel uncomfortable with a friendly pat on their shoulder. Eye contact. Japanese students may not look at the instructor when addressed. An El Salvador student complained Americans refused to look him in the eye as if lying, insincere, or hiding something. Japanese student complained that Americans always stared her in the eye rather than in the throat as she was used to. In many cultures, if you do not push to the front of the line, people assume you are in no particular hurry, otherwise, you would be aggressively demanding attention, so they push in front of you. Let's see some examples of rhetoric style differences among cultures. East Asian. They may prefer to hint at explanations, to grant readers the intelligence to figure out the implications of what has been written and allow the reader to link the ideas in a text. Justification for present statements may be found in a communal wisdom and past authority rather than individual insight. Middle Eastern. Since Arab readers are not upset at reading texts whose meaning are not completely transparent, their writing may tend to be less than transparent. Arabic rhetoric requires coordination, parallelism, and balancing of ideas rather than hierarchy and the subordination of one idea to another as found in English. European. In Spanish, the ability to generalize is favored and nurtured. Elegant Spanish is said to require lengthy introductions and requires embellishments in order to conceal the organizational skeleton of the writing. Henvey describes the stages of cross-cultural awareness into 4 levels. Level 1. The individual very likely sees the culture as odd, bizarre, and exotic. Level 2. Learners focus on expanded knowledge about the culture and they contrast traits with their own. Level 3. The individual begins to accept the culture at an intellectual level and culture can be explained. Level 4. The level of empathy is achieved through living in and through the culture. We're going to watch a short video about level 1, the level. We're going to watch a short video about level 1, when you're still in the state of shock.
It's 115 students from around the globe sitting here in this room. 60% of you are international. There are 33 nations represented in this room. And those kind of mix of cultures create this very exhilarating, fascinating environment, but also very, very, very challenging for all of you. And I'm going to discuss about the personal, social, and academic aspects of being an international student here, starting with the personal. So I came from Israel 2.5 years ago to start this dual degree in journalism and business. And back home, I was a journalist, a senior editor in the second largest newspaper. And when I came here sitting in your seats, just like in a different building, I remember that I was like in this state of mind that is called shock. Now, I was in a total and complete shock. I was sitting right here, and I knew my name, I knew where I live, I knew what I have to do today and tomorrow, but everything was like kind of foggy. I was like walking in a cloud. I couldn't see it. It didn't feel like my life. Now, in retrospect, I realized that this is called culture shock. And while culture shock is experienced differently by different kinds of people, some things are still common, like sadness and loneliness and frustration and anxiety, and I had trouble concentrating at the beginning. And if that's not enough, I was also feeling left out and misunderstood, and eventually I started to really hate Americans. For a good couple of months, I really hated Americans. And during that month, I was like, I couldn't deal with American students. I couldn't deal with domestic students. I was seeking the company of Israeli students because they were the ones I could relate to. They were the ones I could understand. And eventually, I developed like this extreme homesickness. I really, really wanted to go back home to mommy. It felt like this entire experience was a mistake. Now, I wasn't alone. 38% of the international students who are now in their second year say that they encounter symptoms of culture shock. Now, we asked this question after a year of school. So, in my opinion, this figure is at least double, because people tend to undermine their difficulties as time goes by, especially people with big egos like us, right? So I'm sure there are like some international students sitting here in the crowd and that didn't attend international orientation saying, culture shock? Me? No way. I just arrived on Sunday, and I'm completely in love with everything. And that might be true, maybe because those people are in phase 1 of culture shock, which is called the honeymoon. I came to the US, and during the first weeks, I was in love with everything that I've seen. Everything. I mean, seriously, take a look at that. The view from the Empire State. Pretty nice, huh? Impressive. Or Central Park, love is in the air. You know? Or my favorite place, the Brooklyn Bridge. Kind of a nice bridge, huh? So that was the honeymoon. I came to the US, I worked for years on my application. There was nothing more that I wanted than to come here and sit here at Columbia Business School. And when I was like, it was when I was seeing like all the skyscrapers and walking like in Central Park and everything, and the city is beautiful, I felt that like I've made it. I'm in the center of the world. It was a great feeling. But every good thing must come to an end. And when the honeymoon is over, starts phase 2, which is the what am I doing here phase. And during that phase, me and Miss America kind of had a big fight. And when I was walking down the streets, I wasn't in love anymore. I was actually feeling like this guy. This Israeli Borat. Everything became so hard. The hardest part for me was that I couldn't speak. I didn't have the vocabulary. And back in Israel, when I was a journalist, I was making a living out of words. And coming here, I lost my biggest skill, the ability to express myself the way I wanted. And when you cannot express yourself the way you want, you cannot sound smart, you cannot sound intelligent, you cannot sound funny, you cannot sound anything. But that was kind of the big thing. There were lots of little things that were kind of annoying. For example, the subway. What is uptown? What is downtown? How do you read a subway map? So many times I found myself in the wrong station, sometimes in the wrong borough, more than once. Dumb things like grocery shopping. I couldn't find the food that I like. And when I finally did, it tasted really, really bad. Measurement. Who invented the inches, right? And how heavy is 1 pound? And 30 degrees Fahrenheit, is it really hot or really cold, right? Coins. What is the dime? What is the nickel? What is the penny? And how come that the dime is smaller than the nickel? And how come they don't have numbers on them, right? It's the only country in the world that has no numbers on the coins. But what bothered me above everything, beyond comparison, was the Americans. The Americans, not the president. I found the Americans to be so positive all the time. Always happy, even if they had no reason to be. I felt this kind of plastic that I could not communicate with them because I would not getting like the real answer from them. So, for example, if you go to the second-year students here at Columbia and you would ask them, how was your summer internship? Seriously, do it. Everybody would tell you I had an amazing summer internship, even if they really hated it. And so many times people said to me, hey, Dan, let's have lunch sometime. And I would never hear again. Ever. Which eventually led me to the conclusion that all Americans are fake. And when I thought that all Americans are fake, there was like kind of this halo effect. I was also sure that they are distant and insincere and hypocritical and superficial because they are fake. And if they're superficial and distant and insincere, they're probably artificial and overly programmed and flexible and naive and loud, Bad taste in clothing, which is true. Now, you are laughing now, but for me, that period of time was very, very bad. I really, really wanted to go home. This entire experience looked like a mistake. You know, one of the strongest memories that I have from that period of time is that I lie in my bed just before going to sleep. And suddenly I feel the bed kind of shaking. And then kind of floats in the air and leaves my room through the open window and then flies east, crossing the ocean, crossing the Mediterranean, and lands in my old apartment in Tel Aviv. Now, that was a sweet dream. Now, around that time, you can see those little groups forming here at Columbia. The Mexicans with the Mexicans, the French with the French, the Dutch with the Dutch. And it doesn't really make culture shock disappear faster.
Now let's see each stage in detail. Stage 1. Recognition that different cultures exist, pervade all of our lives, and lead people to behave differently. Danger to avoid. The belief that everyone should behave the way you do. Skills to develop. Becoming an observer of native speaker culture. Tolerance, non-judgmental observation or objectivity. Withholding judgment until more is known. Second stage of cultural awareness. Acceptance of both the host culture and student's own culture as he becomes more aware of cultural differences. Danger to avoid. Ethnocentrism, where the student retreats into his own culture and totally rejects the host culture. Skill to develop. Coping with ambiguity regarding how people behave or organize society until more is learned and understood. Third stage of cultural awareness, integration. In this stage, you integrate into the host culture in such a way that the student chooses to become more bicultural. Danger to avoid rejection of either the host culture or the student's own culture. Skill to develop, not just appreciating the host culture, but also letting go to an extent of one's own culture in order to embrace elements of the host culture. Fourth stage of cultural awareness, transcendence over both cultures so that the student can objectively see the strengths and the weaknesses of either culture. Skill to develop, ability to respect other cultures. This doesn't imply complete acceptance of every aspect of a culture. As a teacher, it's very important that you help students with the stages. Ideally, our goal for our students is that they move through these stages of cultural awareness. Remember that some students may not be ready or open to these kinds of discussions. Proceed with caution and be open to the possibility that such discussions won't work with some classes. These are some of the barriers teachers find when teaching culture. Time constraints. Well, some teachers claim I don't have time. My curriculum is overcrowded. I can teach it in the future. Right now, I need to focus on language. The problem is that later never seems to come. Number 2, I don't know much about culture. A teacher's proper role is not to impart facts only, but cross-cultural understanding. Sometimes teachers can come across with students' attitudes. The teacher's role is to make students understand the notion that the ways of behaving, reacting, thinking, and feeling are bound to their own culture. Students often approach target culture phenomena assuming that the new patterns of behavior can be understood within the framework of their own native culture. Finally, the dilemma. I don't know what to teach. What aspects of culture should I teach? Well, I can tell you that you need to develop a curriculum. Just please avoid the Frankenstein approach. A taco from here, a flamenco dancer from there, a gaucho from here, a bullfight from there. The 4F approach is folk dances, festivals, fairs, and food. The tour guide approach, the identification of monuments, rivers, and cities. The by the way approach, sporadic lectures or bits of behavior selected indiscriminately or emphasize sharp differences. Language and culture are inseparable. Why? One could know a second language perfectly in a linguistic sense and yet still fail to communicate well if he or she is ignorant of the cultural dimension of a language. To know another language and not its culture is a very good way to make a fluent fool of oneself, as Winston Brambeck said. The competent ESL teacher will teach culture as a prominent feature of their classroom instruction. This is usually done along with one or more of the 4 skills, often linked with additional vocabulary helps. In fact, American culture or differences between cultures are natural subjects by which to teach language skills. It's important when teaching any skill to always be on the alert for cultural information that students would have little chance of understanding without explanation. Teaching of culture is especially critical for foreigners or immigrants in an English-speaking country. Designing a cultural syllabus. Make sure you balance between visible and invisible culture, stereotyping versus types, triviality, culture divorced from context, political bias, ignoring certain cultural elements, and dangers of the incompleteness, leaving a whole subculture out of discussion. Teach your students to determine if a behavior is culturally driven. Tell them to observe the behavior in several people before making that determination. Try to discover what cultural value or facet of their worldview drives that behavior. Seek to figure out what's culturally polite and appropriate in relation to the behavior. Guidelines for classroom discussions of culture. Decide the rules. State what is to be discussed and why. Give students a few minutes to reflect upon their personal views on the subject. Maintain a non-threatening atmosphere. At times, consider having an outsider or even a student lead the discussion. Here are some key topics for discussion of American culture: independence and freedom, view of time and punctuality, work ethic, educational system, changing American family, levels of friendship, male or female relationships, view and practice of religion, and nonverbal communication. Now it's your time to judge if you are an American culture expert. Can you talk about these topics? Punctuality, table manners, parties and social gathering, relationship network, expressing opinions, expressing anger, the role of the boss, handling problems, position of children or women, elderly life, meals per day and time, shower time frequency, or people that serve you. How do you treat them? A waiter, house helper, etc. Well, that's it for today. Hopefully that was clear. If you have any questions, we can talk in class next time. See ya. God bless.